starting a little later than we'd hoped. It looks like participants are coming in now. So we're just waiting for everybody to get settled. And I apologize for the delay in starting, but we will try and keep our time limit within the hour. Maybe it'll go over a little bit now. Looks like we have about 50 participants or so in the webinar. All right. Well, I think I'll start sharing my screen. All right. So we're in webinar format. Just a few instructions. At the bottom of your screen, there'll be a Q&A question section that you can put in questions for the panelists. And we welcome you to put those questions in advance or as they come to you. And we will get to that at the end. We're going to have, we'll get right into the presentation, and then that will basically move things along from this point on. So let me just start here. So welcome to the webinar. I'm going to say a few things at the beginning just to sort of set the scene for these rebates. And then we'll have a presentation by Madis from Plugin BC. And then we'll have a Q&A expert panel discussion with Madis and Dawn Chandler. So our panelist, Madis, I'll let you read this, but she's basically an EV advisor. She's helped us out already on a couple of webinars. We've been working on this topic in the last few weeks. Prior to working for Fraser Basin Council and Plugin BC, she was at the City of Port Coquitlam as a program ambassador, and she is truly that. She was very helpful in our last webinar. We're pleased to have her back. Dawn Chandler is actually a longtime VEVA member, and he's been working in the area of infrastructure adoption, removing barriers for EVs for some time. Dawn and I first started on this adventure in getting charging to MURBs as early as 2006. So it's 14 years later, and we're now seeing some really progressive things happening. It's quite exciting what we're doing in British Columbia. So let's move along. So first of all is, why would you prepare for an electric car future in your MURB? Well, electric cars are in my estimation past the tipping point. It's pretty clear now that electric cars are not bound by how many people can want to buy them. It's about supply of electric cars. In the past year, electric car sales have increased quite significantly, where combustion cars have dropped off quite a bit. The only reason we're only at 10% new car sales in British Columbia today is because there isn't enough supply of electric vehicles. If you want to buy an electric vehicle today, you're likely on a waiting list for the model you want or the options you want. It's that sort of scenario where we have one lead manufacturer, Tesla, and virtually all the other car companies are now trying to catch up and get their product lines ready for electric car production. Currently, there is about a $14,000 rebate, total rebates available in British Columbia for new cars, but there's also a large used car market developing. And while the $14,000 in incentives makes new cars more affordable, the used cars are actually a very good value, but they're not that much price difference because of that $14,000 incentive to buy new. But more and more new cars are coming on the market, mainly because they're being imported from the US. It adds to our supply of electric vehicles, but it also makes more electric vehicles affordable to people. So more and more, the bottom line is more and more people want to buy electric cars, more and more people have electric cars now. And the good thing about the used ones is they really retain their value. We expect electric cars to last a lot longer than combustion cars. Typically, combustion cars have had a estimated life of 8 to 10 years. Electric cars are going to have a lot longer lifespan than that. We expect them to be in the area of 30 to 50 years. And one of our outliers on that is Detroit, VEVA's own electric car, a 1912 Detroit Electric, 109 years old today, and it still runs as it originally does. And we expect new cars to be substantially longer life than a combustion. So electric cars are here. They're coming, and the opportunity is that everybody wants one now, and you want to make sure that your building is ready for EVs. Some of the things that have been driving differences in the real estate market is that all new buildings, starting as early as 2011 in Vancouver, had a mandate for minimum parking stalls to be charged. So in starting in Vancouver, it was 20%. Nowadays, there's 15 cities that require all new MERB buildings to have 100% of the stalls energized, which means they're wired and ready to plug in a charger. So older buildings are the issue. It's all of the 98% of the building stock that doesn't have that charging available. So we're creating garage orphans. And one of the key things that in order to buy a car, you need to have a convenient place to charge. Now, 80% of all charging for electric cars generally is done at residences, at home. And that's why it's so important. So, and basically EV charging is done when you're parked, not when you're en route typically. So home or work is the ideal place to have your charging. So how to solve this? Well, we don't need to have chargers in every suite now, but the wiring infrastructure to do this is a planned exercise. It's something that if you did it piecemeal, it is very expensive and you're probably going to have to redo it anyway. So it's a planned, and when you think about it, electric car is the third major appliance for any home. Today, the big appliances are stoves and dryers. Now we're adding an electric car, which is actually in between the draws of energy, between a dryer and an oven. And that's a significant amount of electricity to have to draw from your building. So this is why it has to be a planned thing. I'd like to just touch on right to charge legislation. You may have heard of it. We don't have any legislation here, particularly in British Columbia. It is down in California and other jurisdictions, but this is a, right to charge in this right now is really, if you have the money and you can sort of pay for it yourself, the rest of the strata will allow you to do it. Usually they won't allow you to do it. But again, this is a one-off thing. It's not done in context of the entire building. And so really we're advocating a whole building approach when we have in the past. And this is exactly what these EV rebates for infrastructure are giving. It's the ability for you to technically plan the entire upgrade of your building, and they're providing a significant amount of funding to do that. So EV Ready then is the first part of this that we'd like to focus on. It is where you make your plan and you find either an engineering company or a technical installer to make these plans. And they're going to go right down into the details of your electrical drawings for your room and your building and figure out the plan to wire this. Now the EV infrastructure is actually putting the wiring from the electrical room to the rest of the stalls. And this is really the expensive part of readying your building for having a charging outlet at every stall. So I thought I'd take you through just sort of an example, and this happens to be my own strata. And in this case, I just thought I'd go through it like an example to give everybody an idea how this works. So in our building, we have 165 suites and townhomes. It's a tower with townhomes. And there's of course, a transformer room was built before EVs were contemplated. Now, in our building, we have 8 townhomes which have exclusive parking. They have parking behind those garage doors, and the electrical outlets for those garages actually go back to the meters of the apartment themselves. So the suite owner pays for any electricity that goes through that. There's 157 suites, then all of the rest of them are using the common parkade area. So this is the, usually there might be 1 or 2 floors of parking on a large condo. Ours is, I guess I'd say a medium-sized condo. And in total, there's 258 stalls in our building. So the ratio is 1.64 stalls per suite. And we have a maximum of 258, as I said. So just if you're doing some preliminary calculations for what this might look like. So we're down to only 157 stalls for 157 suites that can be wired under the infrastructure plan. The townhomes, since they're actually treated like single family homes, and there's a separate $700 grant you can get for that. So really it's just the 157 suites that are using the shared parkade that we're looking at here. And if you look at then, if you were to wire all of the stalls in the common parkade, that'd be 258, but 157 is the minimum number of stalls to make sure that every suite in the building has access to charging. So if you do the costs now, a rule of thumb cost, and this is very rough, this is where an estimator can come in and give you the exact cost for your building, and it's going to be different in every building, is about $1,200 per stall. And the grant maxes out at $80,000. So the net cost, if you're to do this in your building, and you're only going to go the minimum coverage, so 1 stall per suite, 157, is going to cost about $690. Just as a comparison, if our building, we wanted to do all 258, we'd add the extra 101 stalls. The net cost is going to go up. The grant is capped, and the cost per suite is $1,400 or so. So the question is, what is the value for each suite holder by doing this upgrade? I've been talking to some real estate people, and they realize now that a lot of their clients that are looking for properties specifically say, I want to be able to charge my car because I'm either have an electric car or I'm planning to buy one. And that is becoming a larger and larger percentage of buyers for homes. And I believe I don't know what the real estate value difference is, but I believe it would be probably more than either one of those. And say if you were just saying you wanted to rent your suite out, and maybe you could charge an extra $100 a month for rental in a building like that. Electric car is going to save people anywhere from $200 to $400 a month in operating costs just from gasoline, maintenance, and repairs alone. And they want to have an electric car, so maybe you could put a $100 premium on it. Well, that's $1,200 per year. The capitalized value of that is much higher. So obviously, this is a very good deal. It's an expense where you're not just fixing some broken plumbing or something, you're actually going to gain value from this. All right, so some other issues that we really don't have time to go into, maybe in the Q&A, but you want to make a decision. Do you want to do all the spaces or just the minimum per the infrastructure grant? Always getting strata owner approval for capital expenditure has always been a big thing, but like I say, this is an expenditure that's going to add value as opposed to just maintaining what you had by fixing repairs or something that's gone wrong. We haven't yet got a clear vision on how we're going to settle common electricity costs between the users. There are still some issues to be worked out on that. And then also you may have visitor spaces in your building that you want to electrify, and that has to be considered. That's the end of my presentation. I'd just like to point out we have put together a checklist. If you go to our EV Ready page on our website, there's a download to download a PDF, and that will give you all the basic things to get started on a strata initiative for this. And that's the end of my presentation. So now I'm going to pass it over to Madi, and she is going to provide us with more insights on the program itself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And it's a pleasure to be here for sure. I'm just going to pull up my presentation and then share my screen. If you just give me a moment. Can everyone see that? So I'll begin by saying that thank you for having me again. My name is Madis. I work at Plugin BC. I'm one of the EV advisors, and I'm reaching you today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coquitlam First Nations. And my pronouns are she and her. The new program is quite exciting for a number of reasons, because the rebates amounts are actually quite a bit higher, which means that what wasn't completely inaccessible to some stratas before due to budgeting constraints can now be somewhat accessible to move this forward, these efforts forward. Also, the fact that it is required for stratas to have an EV ready plan means that this is going to be done more efficiently. It's going to be done so that the power that is drawn from the grid is going to be manageable. It can be regulated. The only thing that might be a concern at this point is just the brief timelines. The deadline for applying for this program is end of February 2028, which coincides with the fiscal year end for the province. However, likely there will be additional funding. We just don't know how much, and it might change the program or it might stay the same. So more on that after March. With the new program, there are two pathways. So for the past 3 years, there has been funding available to purchase and install chargers, and those capped at $14,000. With the new program, there's an EV ready planning, and then the infrastructure that goes in that can now be rebated for up to 50%. And in terms of the total maximum of each section of this rebate program, you've got 75% of the cost, or up to $3,000 for an approved EV ready plan. I should just mention here that for the EV ready plan, there is no pre-approval required. So all you need to do is speak to your electrical contractor or engineering company and have this plan, set up for you. And what you have to submit is your paid invoice as well as the plan itself to get the rebate. For the infrastructure installation and the charger installation, however, you still do need the pre-approval, which means that you will have to submit your pre-approval documents, which consists of 3 things. One is the permission from the strata to move forward in this direction. One is your quote from your electrical professional, and the last one is an electrical contractor form that they would have to fill out. It is downloadable on BC Hydro's website. Those 3 documents will allow you to reserve a portion of the funding that is available for your project, and then you go ahead and get the installations done and pay for everything, submit your documents to get your refunds back. For the infrastructure, you now get up to 50% of the cost, or a maximum of $600 per parking space, whichever is less, and it maxes out at $80,000. And if you are not including the cost of the $600 in your application, then it's up to $4,000 per charger. But if you are including that as a separate portion, then it's up to $3,400 per charging station, which maxes at $14,000 per strata, per site actually. So if your complex happens to have 2 or 3 or up to 4, you can put up to 4 applications for the different sites. So this allows for a combined total of $97,000, as was mentioned before, per site, which is a significant increase from where the program has been before. So as it was mentioned by John before, the most important part of this plan, and likely the part that you are able to meet before the deadline, would be the EV ready planning. That's something that, you know, if you get it passed by your strata right away, you may be able to have a few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, to get that done and submit your receipts before the deadline. And in fact, that's your roadmap to get your building from here to 2040, when everyone will be driving EVs, and that ensures that things are done right and fairly, so that everyone can have access at some point, even if it's not today. The utilities and the province have assured us that if you do end up getting your pre-approval prior to the deadline, but you are unable to complete the project, they would honor those pre-approval as long as there is funding for next fiscal year. Emphasis on if. So that's completely up in the air, but there's a good chance that there will be funding. And so I would really encourage you to start the process now. As far as EV ready requirements, there's a document that I've put the link in the question and Q&A. If you just click on that link, there's a PDF, there's a 2-page PDF that you can look at that lists the EV ready plan requirements in details. But just some highlights of that is the electrical capacity assessment, minimum charging performance requirements, which I'm sure we'll hear more about from Dawn. And the charging options, so the design options for each stall, as well as a detailed description of what the energy management system is going to be, and cost estimates. So those are what you need to include in the EV ready plan. And the infrastructure requirement, obviously, once you have done the EV ready plan, then you can go ahead with the infrastructure. You cannot do the infrastructure without doing a proper EV ready planning. So for this, again, you need pre-approval, but this is what is required in terms of the specifications of the infrastructure, for the infrastructure itself. So 1 parking space per dwelling, as long as there is one assigned. They have to be level 2 charging infrastructure. Junction boxes need to be labeled for EV charging. Electrical permits have to be, you know, they have to meet standards of the municipality in which they're installed. And the EV management system has to be activated, and the back-end infrastructure has to achieve applicable charging performance requirement, which is specific to your building and your demographic. And the eligible costs include the purchase of charging stations, any labor and construction costs, permits, the design elements of that EV ready plan, any signage, as well as the cost of your network connection to maximum of 2 years. I should just, as a side note, mention that Tesla wall connectors are not currently included in this program, and the reason being is that they're not networkable with other chargers due to their proprietary technology. So that's something that may change if Tesla decides to adopt, you know, one of the 2 other, you know, protocols, but at this time it's not an option. And the EV ready charging equipment requirements are listed as well here. I won't go into it in much detail. You can look at all of those in the program guide that is posted on the BC Hydro website, as well as our website, for all the specifications of that. And that sort of brings my presentation to a conclusion. I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and we probably want to get to those as it's now 4:40. So with that, I'll close. And here's my contact. If anyone has any specific questions that I can answer in the future if we don't get around to it today.
Thank you, Madi. That is terrific. We're actually right on time, even though we had this bit of a delayed start. So we wanted to allocate about 20 minutes for questions. And we have questions here in the Q&A. You can put your questions in. I'll just start right from the top here. First one is, did I get it correct that the deadline for applying is February 28th of 2021? Yes, it's February 28th. This program was announced on December 3rd, and we were concerned because it was all focused on the charger, doubling of the charger rebates, which is actually the smallest part. The most important part of this whole thing is the EV ready and the infrastructure, because you need that first before you just add the chargers later. And unfortunately, February 28th, 2021 is a very tight time frame. And what we're hoping to do is basically provide awareness of this infrastructure grant. As Madi said, we're probably not going to get a lot of people that can turn around and get their strata and get the EV ready plan approved and then get the wiring done immediately after that. It's going to be very tight. But what we wanted to do is get the information out there so people can at least get their EV ready plan done. So if and when the program is refunded in the next fiscal year of the government, people are ready to act on it. And I think this is the most important thing we can do right now, is really get people at least to the EV ready stage. That's the most important thing. So thank you for asking that question. Another one, the current rebate for parking garages is to bring electricity conduits for each unit rather than to each stall. Yes, the minimum standard is to have it for every unit, every suite, so that every suite will be equal. Each one will have access to EV charging. Now, we were discussing this, maybe Dawn would like to weigh in a bit here. We were discussing this earlier about, in our building, there's 157 suites, but there's 258 stalls. Would you wire all of them at once, or just the minimum? And, my position is, well, you're never going to charge. You could easily share, if you have two stalls, you could share one charger between a car, and that's efficient use of chargers. And you might have two stalls to your suite, so you just, the cord's long enough it can reach both cars. Dawn, did you want to just talk about what other issues could happen if you didn't wire all of the 258 stalls?
Sure. I think of this plan, EV Ready plan, as a plan for 2040. For most of the buildings we're looking at today, they'll still be standing in 2040, and every car will be electric. So you want to be sure that there is enough outlets to charge every car in the future. This program said, well, we'll just do one per suite, kind of cutting back a little bit, but they're recognizing that there's a lot of overbuilt buildings in terms of the amount of parking stalls there are. Typically, there's 32 to 43% empty stalls, I think it was in a recent survey. There's an article out recently describing that. So people aren't buying as many cars, not driving as much. So the need for it has to be estimated fairly carefully. You want to plan for the future. If you own two stalls, they aren't necessarily side by side, so you might end up sharing with a neighbor. That adds complexities. If you use one charge station for two cars, you've got to consider the power requirements of two cars versus one, which typically maybe double the mileage, so double the power. So you've got to plan for that. That comes back to your performance requirements. So those are some of the issues. I think you have to be thinking of this as a plan for the future, implement in phases. This phase maybe just a few in the beginning, or implement the or a few chargers, but one per suite with a plan for everyone in the future, individual to the suite or to the condo.
Yeah, we don't know the future. We know that electric cars are getting more efficient. There's cars like the Aptera, which have recently been announced, and they are, 1/3 the energy requirement to do the same thing as some of the existing EVs today. So, and there is a trend to have fewer stalls in new buildings because fewer people are having cars. And I know in our building, there's a lot of empty parking stalls. So I think the minimum is a good starting point. And we're very pleased that they did bring that part of the program together, because I think we're well ahead for the rest of the world as far as this type of progressive policy. I'll get on to the next question. Will this PowerPoint be available for review later? Yes, we will. We will put it on our EV Ready page, so check back there, and we'll put this presentation there for you to download. We're seeing higher costs per EV charging unit. Are you quoting based on a significant volume discount? The chargers, does Madis or Don, would you like to take that question on? I'm not an expert in charging, but I know charging companies are putting more features in. They're making them wireless. They're connecting them to your smartphone.
Yeah, so for that, I mean, if you're just getting a couple of chargers installed, your cost could be $5,000 or $7,000 a charger. But if you're obviously installing more than that, then you get group pricing. Yeah, and the previous to this program, the maximum for a single port charger was $2,000. Double port was $4,000. Now it's $4,000 and $8,000. So they do, for the chargers itself, if you're only installing in a few, you do get a little bit more money.
We see the market forces starting to have effect. They had firm prices originally. Now that there's more and more competition, the prices are coming down. I think I'm seeing one smart charger coming out advertised just under $1,000, and it'd be full featured, OCPP compliant, networked, etc. So that's maybe closer to the floor. They will be more expensive than the dumb chargers a little bit, because there's more inside them. There's more computers and things to talk to the communications. But yeah, I would negotiate.
Okay, terrific. The next question is from Jim Gord, and he has a question regarding what is actually a MERB complex, and maybe Madis, you're the best qualified to answer this question.
Yeah, so MERB stands for multi-unit residential building. However, really what defines it is the shared parkade. So as long as, I mean, townhomes, if they are using a shared parkade, they qualify for this program. If they have their own private garage or carport, then they would actually be considered a single family home. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. So Matt Fraser has a question. How are the costs for power allocated? How do you track and allocate power consumption by specific parking space? This is a good question. Who wants to tackle it?
I'll take that one, John.
Okay, great.
About a year or 2 years ago, the provincial government, under the Building Act, under the Strata Property Act, introduced an order in council to say that to pay for EV charging, you can either do a flat rate or charge by energy, or any other way that you agree on that's reasonable. So basically, any way you want to try and share the costs is acceptable to them. The elephant in the room, of course, is Measurement Canada, who have federally jurisdiction, and they say if you're going to measure sell by energy per kilowatt hour, then you have to have a revenue grade meter. which nobody really does. It's more expensive to install. I asked the presenter on that about a year ago at a conference from Measurement Canada what they would do with existing. He says, well, grandfathering comes to mind. So I would do what's reasonable. People do want to pay for their own gasoline and they want to pay for their own power. So a meter is reasonable. If you go revenue grade compared to non-revenue grade, you might see a 2% difference in a $30 a month fee. So less than $1. It might be the error. So it's you're really talking nickels and dimes there.
Okay, that is an issue that is quite a hot topic in the EV community. And I'd just like to mention our webinar partners today are EV Society of Canada, who have assisted us with the webinar format. And essentially, we are working with them with going to Measurement Canada to deal with these problems. And it's really a bureaucracy problem that we don't have a solution, not a quick one anyway. But that's a very good question. It's pretty easy to divide the costs if you wanted to, but this is the regulatory problem. Yes, the ones we've answered. Got the deadline.
I see a question about different addresses. A strata corporation that has 6 buildings with 5 Canada Post municipal street addresses. I believe that the maximum the maximum number of buildings per site is 4. So 5 you may need to just split what is available in terms of funding and try to space out the design so that somehow you are able to give access to that 5th building in some way.
We had a question here.
I'll just comment briefly on that. I've seen a number of large buildings like this, 5, 6, 7, 10 buildings in a complex. And because you've got $80,000 per building available, you've got $320,000. I've yet to see a building that comes close to that in the cost. So there's usually enough in there.
And you get economies of scale when you get to that size, for sure.
Some.
Yeah. Our next question is the electrification costs. The infrastructure cost does not mean having to spend immediately on gateways and actual chargers. Those can be done later. Yes, the infrastructure is the background wiring. It's the conduits, the wiring. It's the ability to energize a parking stall. So when you add a charger, it's basically mounting the charger to the wall and plugging it into the junction box at the parking spot. So that's what the EV charger rebates look after. The infrastructure is getting all that back end wiring into place. So that getting that done all at once is the real benefit. After that, you can add chargers as you need them, but you can still, your suite is EV ready, and the cost of the chargers are actually not that much depending on if you're buying it yourself. But that might be a good question, Madis or Don. After the infrastructure is in, do you have latitude to add your own chargers as you please if you don't want to go through a grant program?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the point of this.
So you have lots of flexibility, and not everyone, there's no requirement for them to be networked.
Oh, that's the thing. They would have to be networked, and they would have to be compatible with what is in place in that building.
Right. So this is in relation to the load management system. And is there any networking requirement for the utility to be able to see what individual stalls are doing? The data tracking is just staying locally then, or with the network provider?
I think the networking requirement is future proofing. The utility wants to be able to talk to charge stations in the future so that when their system becomes overloaded, they can tell you to, or ask you to slow down your charging, and they'll pay you if you slow down and respond, because it stops them from having to say start up a gas plant. for excess power requirements. So that's why the networking and charge stations. The charge stations usually cost about double what the wiring costs.
Okay, let's go to our next question. Somebody's wondering if owners of rental buildings have been engaged in this effort. We are reaching out to them. I haven't talked to any directly, but essentially they can use this funding as well. And obviously, as I used in my example, you know, if you do have electrified stalls, you could probably increase your rents. Madis, you're nodding your head. Do you want to say something here?
Yeah, so the program is definitely open to property managers of rental buildings. So they would have to, and actually we've had quite a few co-ops come forward and do this, but in terms of property managers, not as many as stratas and co-ops, but there has been a few that have come forward, but it is open the same way to them as it is to stratas. And so they just need to basically, it's actually quite simpler in terms of the process, because usually one or two people are in charge of making the decision for that building, rather than putting it to an AGM and needing a 3/4 vote. So definitely we do encourage them to take advantage of this offer as well.
All right, our next question from Jim. Is the approval of the strata owners 75% needed to submit the application by the deadline of February 28th, or is the approval of the strata council sufficient at that stage? Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I have been on stratas for a while. Usually every capital expenditure requires a supermajority from your building, and the supermajority would be set in the bylaws. It may be 75%. Often is. Sometimes it's less. It might be 2/3, say. You have to check your bylaws for that. But Madis, could you speak to that?
Yeah, for sure. So for the EV Ready plan, because the cost is not as much, I've heard people say that they can take that portion out of the maintenance fees and split the cost, because if it's covered up to 75% or $3,000, then they often need to charge, maybe it'll be $4,000 to split between the buildings. And I mean, every strata is different. So that's a small portion and you can get that done. But for the larger infrastructure expenditure, which is, you know, can be significant, you definitely would need your strata's permission. However, you don't need that for the pre-approval. So you can get your pre-approval in terms of just the strata council members saying, yes, we are pursuing this direction. That's your permission that you submit, a letter of permission that you submit, as well as your quote and your contractor form, consultation form. Those three pieces of document will get you a pre-approval. You are not obliged to go forward with this plan if you have a pre-approval. But if you have your approval, a portion of the funding is reserved for your project. So once you know how much is the cost of your project, and you know how much you have been pre-approved for, you can now know how much exactly you're likely to be spending in terms of that larger budget that needs to be approved by the majority. So at that point, you go to your AGM and you present them with how much you know you get pre-approved for and how much the project is going to cost.
So
just thought I'd say briefly, if you go to the Strata Property Act, I think it's section 95 or 98, it sets a limit of about $2,000 that the board can spend without pre-approval. And if you say have a $5,000 EV Ready plan, cost $3,000 by the government, $2,000 by the strata, they might be able to, depends, you can change your bylaws, that would be different. But that I would look in the Strata Property Act for where that limit is in your bylaws. And just the board can just make a decision.
Great. Yeah, it's a really, this program is a very tight time frame to get everything done. I suppose if you were really well coordinated with a condo and had great relations and you could get people to agree, you could approve a budget, a project amount that's well above what you estimate it to be. And if it's ready to go, then perhaps that could help you. But as I said earlier, I think the realistic approach is get the EV Ready done this time and be ready for the next offering of this program. Next question. Question on cooperatives. Can you comment on the eligibility or other challenges for co-ops? Are they considered rental MURBs? Madis.
They're not. They're just considered MURBs, and they qualify for the same. The only thing that I know for some MURBs, it's been that they want to, for example, electrify their visitors parking, because that's the common area parking, and that they don't need to worry about each individual and whether or not they want to opt into this program. But other than that, they seems to be having the same challenges as the stratas, basically.
Yes, it's coming to agreement. That's the big challenge. Our next one from Jacques: is the maximum subsidy for chargers 14,000 per MURB or per building in a MURB? Our strata has 3 towers, so 3 buildings. Madis?
Could you please repeat the first part of that question?
So Jacques is asking, the charging subsidy is $14,000. Can that be triplicated by building?
Yes.
So it's 97,000 per building, which is the maximum amount if you did everything.
Right. And if they don't want to do the EV Ready plan and they just want to do a few chargers, then they qualify for 14,000 max per site.
What, if any, impacts do you anticipate on strata fees? Well, typically this would be a special, I would think this would be a special allocation to the owners. They would have to pay for it as a special resolution approved project where they would contribute the cost to this. So on ongoing strata fees, Dawn or Madis, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, let's say your installation cost of wiring were $1,000, $1,500. That's going to have to be covered through a special resolution or something like that up front. The ongoing costs vary quite widely. These cover things like building, maintenance, repair, help, support, and they vary from $0 to $20, $25 per person per month. That's where the profit margin for the charge station manufacturers is actually. The other thing to consider is demand charges, and that can, larger buildings particularly, those can go up quite a bit. And that's how your products and company suppliers are separated in the marketplace, is these ongoing fees. The actual install costs pale in comparison. You might have an install cost to say up to between $1,000 and $2,000 per stall. And then after say 10 years, your life cycle cost might be up around anywhere between $4,000 and $8,000. And that, if that's including electricity costs at $30 a month, plus demand charges anywhere between $5 and $50 a month, and your fees, which nobody seems to like, but somebody's got to pay for the billing and administration and help support that kind of thing.
Don, you've worked on a number of projects. Have you ever compared the before and after demand charge increases through active charging, or are we still too sort of early days with not enough people charging in the parkade to make a difference?
No, I've modeled it, and I'm with AES Engineering, and in the reports that we do now, we're starting to include life cycle costs, where you can predict what it'd be depending on, and the problem is with you share, say 10 on a circuit, maybe 2 cars are on the circuit and they're saturating it, so you're hitting your maximum limits, and then the time is pushed out after that. But then the demand charges will be at their maximum also, and you may have only 10 people in a building of 100 with charge stations. So they're going to be paying the bigger proportion of demand charges. When everybody's got an EV, those would be shared amongst more people. So do look at demand charges over time. And the breakpoints are 35 kilowatts and 150 kilowatts. That would translate to about 50 or 200 units in a building size before you go into those different categories.
So smaller condos would not necessarily see demand charges anyway. It's just the larger ones.
Yeah, up to 50 cars or so, you'll probably, for a good management system, you're not going to see them.
Right.
That'd be a 35 kilowatt, and you could easily do that, maybe even 70 or 100 if you're in urban core. If you're out in Abbotsford or Prince Rivers, some further out distance where it's colder, then you might need an average of a kilowatt per stall.
All right. Another question here. Since they don't cover for Tesla infrastructure, does this mean the infrastructure that is covered won't work with Teslas? Well, just to clarify, they're not covering Tesla chargers, but the electricity, the infrastructure is universal for any charger. And I guess the reason they're not publicly subsidizing Tesla is because it's proprietary. It's a proprietary design, and Tesla chargers don't work with other EVs. So they're publicly funding the open one that will work with all EVs. And if you're a Tesla owner, well, you just get a small adapter and you're ready to go. So that's, I hope that's answering your question. Okay, here's a more technical question. This is for you, Don. Given OCPP interoperability standards, can a strata start with just the wiring and then add gateways and chargers as people actually want them?
Ooh, technically, I guess it would depend a little bit. I would think generally no. The reason is the charge station would be a different model, because the CSA standard that's being developed and what we're looking at is if communications fails, the charge station will shut off because you've lost control of it. So if you don't have a management system in place, talking to it every few seconds, it's going to say, gee, I've lost communications, we can't continue. Or I'll go to a fail-safe, maybe at 8 amps. So a relatively slow charge station. And that could go on for hours or days, and the management system might come back online and not know you're still charging.
So just to clarify then, what you're saying is the load management system will have a protocol, this OCPP, open, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but that is a protocol, and all of your charging equipment has to be in sync with that, right? So that
it doesn't have to use OCPP, it's just a protocol, but it's fairly common.
Yes.
It's a good one. But basically, the EVMS, your management system, is the manager. If you have different managers, they can't all talk to the same stations. So it's like buying a cable TV. You either get Shaw or you get TELUS. You can't have a TELUS communications network talk to a Shaw box. So similar here, you've got, but you're seeing now, we've seen recent on a new management system that'll talk to 14 different suppliers of charge stations, which is great because that creates competition in the market. And we might even be able to have 2 different management systems be installed and one or the other talk to all the stations. So it is getting standardized, and that helps the competition and the redundancy, avoiding stranded assets.
Okay, we've got a question from Nanaimo. This person is in a building, in a strata with 4 buildings, 65 units per building. They're looking to get rebates on each building, which is, they can get up to 4 buildings per legal strata, right? So that's covered. The other part of the question is, I had a strata, our strata had an evaluation done, not enough power in our building. They looked into an outdoor station for all people to use, quoted 25,000 for that. Does this only qualify for the 3,400 rebate? Okay, I think the problem is not enough power in the building. And this is a 4 building strata with 65 units each. Dawn, you know, power limitations that go into a site is a big deal if you don't have enough capacity. Can you address that? Unmute. Dawn, just unmute.
Oh, sorry. I'm surprised. I've yet to see a building that does not have enough power in the building to get people charged. It depends a bit where it is. If in Nanaimo, if you're out in Lanceville, for example, have a longer commute, you do need more power. And if it's smaller buildings tend to be more trouble, like small townhomes or small buildings. Large condos, particularly newer ones, have tons of power. if your electrical professional doing the calculated load is using just dedicated circuit calculations, very few buildings have enough power. With load management, you're sharing maybe 6 or 10 on a circuit. Easily, you can do that. If you can't do it there, you can use a monitored system, and it just pushes the charging time out and delays your finish time a little bit. So usually you can find a solution. If you contact me at AES Engineering, then I can explain to you a little more how that can be done.
Okay.
Yeah,
Not everybody's familiar with these techniques.
And also the infrastructure funding can cover the, can include the cost of installing transformers, sub-transformers, should that be necessary. I mean, it might not be enough, but to cover the whole cost, but it does definitely help with that.
Okay, let's move to some of the questions. We're after 9 o'clock. We're happy to be here for a few more minutes. So we'll just try and move through some questions quickly. One question is, who would have the as-built electrical wiring diagrams for our building in the parquet and electrical room? Check with your building property manager or somebody who's been in the building quite a while. But your property manager should have all that information. Who can I ask BC Hydro about 12-month hourly consumption for strata building? You can, if you download our EV Ready checklist, there's a link to the form you can download from BC Hydro, and just use that form to go forward. Typically, again, your property manager, whoever is looking after your hydro bills, should be able to do that. Let's see now. Here's one. So to confirm, you need to include parking spots owned, allocated, but not being used, and it must be 220, 110 not applicable. Dawn, do you want to make a quick comment on that?
Sorry, yeah. The program, any load management systems work on level 2, not level 1. The analysis I've done for somewhat recently also show that level 1 is more expensive because you're using dedicated wires to every stall, and that's a lot more copper, which is expensive. So even if they allowed it, and it's been discussed, the performance won't be as good, because if there's nobody else using the power, you can use it all, and you can get full charging rates early mornings, middle of the day. Level 1 isn't really cheaper necessarily, although it's cheaper up with the charge station because it comes with a car, and the install is a bit more. There wouldn't be like billing fees necessarily because they don't have, they're not networked, and that's a challenge. So there's a number of issues around level 1.
Okay, David has a good question. Just to clarify that where this program applies, do the program grants apply anywhere in BC? And yes, they are anywhere in BC. So you could be Fort St. John, you could be Dawson Creek, anywhere these rebates apply. So thank you, David, for asking that question.
I'll just let you know that outside of the Lower Mainland, it's FortisBC, or whoever is your utility, it's likely FortisBC. So you just need to reach your utility service provider for those rebates, and you pre-approve and apply for the rebates through them.
Here's a good question. How do we find reliable contractors with experience installing the infrastructure? I think a good place to go is on BC Hydro's page, and I think we've referenced it. They have Alliance of Energy Professionals, and those are people that work closely with BC Hydro. I think anybody in that alliance would be a good place to start. There's an email address on BC Hydro's page, and I think we've listed that you can ask them for a list. We do have some Energy Alliance companies that we've personally been working with here at VEVA, or people know them. One would be Cielo. Another is Electrum in the Lower Mainland, and on Vancouver Island, I think it's I can't remember the name here. I better not say anything else. We'll add some information to our EV Ready page. So check back there later.
And just I'll make a note there, and this is to Medice particularly. I went to that website for the Training Institute and looked for a Canadian link, and there wasn't any. So I couldn't find any Canadian companies. I know AES Engineering used to be a member, didn't have much there. But locally here in BC, we have the Electrical Joint Training Institute out in Port Moody, where VEVA used to meet occasionally. And they've trained some of the people you've mentioned as well, and they have an training program for the Red Seal electricians locally.
Another question, just wants somebody here wants clarification on does this really, I think it's the EV Ready question, does the strata need an assessment from an engineer or equivalent or just filling out some forms? I'm not clear what steps have to be taken before February 28th. We've got a quote from an engineer for an assessment, $5,400. Does this have to happen before February 28th? Medice.
Yeah, so for the EV Ready plan, you actually need to get the EV Ready plan done by the engineer or the contractor who works with the engineer. Basically, you need to have the plan in hand and you need to have the paid receipt, not just the quote, because you don't need pre-approval for that. You just need to submit your receipt and plan to get the rebate.
Okay, a couple strata questions, which are really, this is the complexity of stratas coming in. Here's one that came in just after 5 o'clock. Instead of the strata paying, can just a few owners band together and pay for the infrastructure? I suppose they could if they had the permission of the strata to do that, to pay for it. But again, you still, I think, need to have the owners approve the work. And I'm not a strata lawyer, but I believe anytime you're doing anything to a common property, you need to have the approval of the owners. So even though they may not be paying for it, they probably still have to grant permission. Does any of the panelists have any other thing to add there?
That's an interesting question. I've never come across that, because how could, a few people pay for everybody's infrastructure? That cost is likely astronomical for just a few people. So it's nice of you to offer, but I'm not sure if it's practical. And as John said, you definitely need the permission of the Strata Council.
Another strata issue, my building does not have outright ownership of the parking stalls. These are still held under a limited lease agreement with the developer. Would this be an issue in this program? Medice, do you have any insights on that?
So if I understand it correctly, the common property is not under the strata?
It's held by a limited lease agreement with the developer.
And that's for everyone's parkade, or it's just the visitors parking?
Not specified.
Yes, so I mean, if the entire parkade is under the developer's jurisdiction, if there is any infrastructure changes that need to be done, it would have to be approved by them, and they would have to technically put the application in for the rebates. Yeah.
Okay. Another question, are the funding programs available for rental properties or only for private owned? Can you apply for vacation properties? Essentially, if you qualify as a MERB, I think you qualify, but typically rental properties, it's the owner that would be.
No, yeah, so for vacation rentals, unfortunately, this program doesn't quite fit with the purpose, or the rental properly doesn't quite fit with the purpose of the program, which is to allow access to EV charging for permanent residents of a building, not the guests.
Very good. So vacation properties are out. Okay, very good. All right, there's a few more questions, but I think we've sort of tapped our time. I think maybe we should wrap up now. We will, again, go to the EV Ready page that you can navigate to from our homepage. we will add a little bit more information that we just talked about. You can download the EV checklist there. There's some more information. We'll also add the presentations from both Plug-in BC Madis presentation and the VEVA presentation for you to refer to later. Send us any comments. There's a mail to the stratacharging@veva.ca. You can contact us, and we'd love to hear any feedback you had from this webinar. And it's something I think we'll be doing again, especially if the program is reannounced. But we're hoping that everybody would benefit from this one, so they just get started and get an idea what the value of this program is, because really it is very special funding that's not available anywhere else in the world that we know of. So thank you very much again for coming this afternoon, and we hope to be in touch with you in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks to all. Stay safe and take advantage of the program. Where else can you get this much money from the government? Install as much as you can. Bye all.
Have a good evening.